Hello, and congratulations to everyone taking the time out of their schedules to join us on the webinar. We're looking at the list of the people who've logged in, many clients, many friends, many guests. Thank you. Thank you for all the trust you've placed in us, and thank you for inviting your friends and loved ones who may not be as well acquainted with this as you are. What we'd like to talk to you about is kind of the format. This is the new reality of communicating these days. So if we were in our normal seminar environment, I would be standing at the front welcoming you all, and I'd say, silence your cell phones. And by the way, the restrooms are right outside the door if you need to use those during the course of the presentation. And then we would say, and the food is in the back of the room. Looks like better food than we often serve, but this would be a normal seminar scenario. Well, you all know where your restrooms are in your home, and you also know where your kitchens are. So we want to thank you again for taking the time to lunch and learn with us. What I'd say at this point is that if you have a pen and paper, now you'll notice that this particular one is a ink pen. Last time I used one of those, it didn't fare so well for my clothing. But get out a pen and a paper and take some notes. Interesting fact for many of you who've known me for a number of years, you'll know that today we're doing help for Second Harvest Food Bank, where for every dollar given, 3 meals are provided. And there's over 12,600 children that need this kind of help from us here in our community. But June 14th was actually named Allie Swafford Day for philanthropy that I've been involved in for well over 30 years. So hallmark of our company is giving back, and we want to give back to you. You may recognize many of my excellent partners, Craig Hammer, Wesley Price, also folks that walk to and through retirement with you. So we're going to talk today. Many of us have had many opportunities that we took, and that turned out well. But there's probably many opportunities that we've also missed. So today we're going to give you the opportunity to hear about some strategies, and then we're going to give everyone an opportunity for a complimentary virtual meeting. So if there's some personalized attention that you need, or you have some specific questions, we'll be glad to address those. When you tuned in today, or as you were thinking about tuning in, what brought you here? Well, I'm sure for many of you, you're not thinking it's, woohoo, I'm elated with everything that's going on in our society today. Obviously, this is a very difficult time in our country. The pandemic has hit the world in the United States, causing a great deal of uncertainty and economic volatility. The daily news cycle and the headlines certainly aren't helping. Sometimes you may even feel like this young child, oh my gosh, hair on fire and eyes wide open. Even though we can't control what's going on in the economy or the markets, we do have a lot of control over your financial planning. So we're hoping by the end of this webinar that you'll feel like these two young sunbathers, a little more comfortable, a little more confident. And we hope for our guests that we're going to present you with some resources that you can take advantage of to move forward. There's 3 topics that we want to present, and all 3 we hope are going to give you perspective, peace of mind, and a path forward. The first topic is volatility and volatility ahead. We've certainly had volatility behind, but we anticipate volatility ahead. The second one is, how are we going to weather this storm? And whether we called it the peanut butter theory, the smooth and chunky, the bucket plan, concepts are very similar in what we need to prepare for. And certainly we're going to wrap up this presentation with things to consider in a market crisis. So let's start with the market landscape and major risks. For perspective, let's think back on something called a black swan theory. Well, for years, it was thought that black swans didn't exist. But in 1697, black swans were actually discovered in Australia. So now it's more of a metaphor used to describe unpredictable financial market events. By their nature, these events are considered to be either improbable, unprecedented, or both. The point is, we all want to know the future, but no one has a crystal ball. We can model and predict some things to an extent, but not the black swan events. And this creates both psychological and practical problems. Let's think about 3 recent black swan events. The first one was the dot-com bubble, 2000 to 2002. Then the financial crisis, 2007 to 2009. And of course now the COVID-19, starting February 19th of 2020. And who knows when that one will be over. But in fact, when you look at these time frames, you think, well, did it really take that long? And how deep was that bubble and what happened? Well, even though the dot-com bubble was said to have started September 1st of 2000, ended October 9th of 2002, in reality, that was 25 months of a downturn, followed by a full 42 months to fully recover. Very similar, that can be said about the financial crisis. Supposedly, it started October 9th, 2007 and ended March 13th of 2012, but in reality, it was 17 months down, 36 months to fully recover. So now let's take COVID-19. Well, what's happened in this scenario? Well, first of all, we had the worst first quarter in the S&P's history. We had unprecedented government spending to try and keep our economy afloat. We've had skyrocketing unemployment and now civil unrest and rioting. So how is all that going to play out? Well, it's going to affect both our health and our wealth. Or never have these intersections been so evident as they are today. Clearly, you are your top asset, so your health is the most important thing. And we're relying on our medical professionals' advice on how to keep us all healthy. It's also important to protect your wealth. And we're here today to show you how to do just that. But protect from what exactly? Well, there are 3 major risks: market risk, interest rate risk, and sequence of return risk. And we're going to address all 3. Let's start with market risk. Well, we all know that the stock market goes up and down. We've lived through a number of those, some we just talked about. But what I can say is, if we use a roller coaster analogy, in the past, the highs were not that high, the lows were not that low, but think about this today. Today's ride is a lot scarier. The volatility we're seeing is far greater than ever before in history. We're seeing stocks and entire industries move more in 1 hour today than used to be in 1 year back in the 1970s and 80s. this increased volatility has served to increase the emotional intensity many investors feel. But the roller coaster has not been the only problem. Think about the long-term relationship to stocks and the market and portfolios. Well, for the past 10 years, March of 2010 through March of 2020, investments have grown. In fact, if you looked at putting in $100,000 over that 10-year period, we would now see that balance, at least March, the beginning of March of 2020, be $250,797,000. But let's look at a longer time horizon. Let's go all the way back to 1926 and see both the bear and the bull markets over time. So if we look at the number of blue, which of course would be the bull markets, compared to the number of red, which would be the bear markets, you can see that the bull markets have lasted far longer than the bear markets. And yet there's no consistent way to predict when performance will be positive or negative. So investors staying the course have been rewarded over time. So think about it. If you invested $1,000 in the US stocks in 1970, how much would that be worth today? $1,000, 1970. Well, if you use the buy and hold strategy, that value would be $121,353. But what about if you missed just the best day in that long time frame? So if you missed one, your balance would go from 121 down to 108. But what if you missed 5? 121 down to 77. What if you missed the 15 best days? Well, now what we see is $43,472. So you'd lost nearly $78,000, or said the other way, by staying the course, you had almost $78,000 more. So what's the moral of the story? Don't panic. But we all need to say, what can we do now? Yes, there are roller coasters. And yes, what we want to do is stress test those portfolios. We want to make sure that your risk tolerance is consistent with the amount of risk that you're taking in your portfolios. So whether you are a current client or a friend, and possibly to be a client, stress testing your portfolio is extremely important. We need to determine what's the right balance of stocks and bonds. Well, what about interest rate risk? Second risk that we talked about is related to where are interest rates today? My goodness, I got a statement on a money market account I had, and the rousing interest for this month was 0.1. 0.1. And think about savings. Savings are definitely on the low side as well. Again, I had a CD just about to mature, so I got one of those bank statements that said your current rate is 2.75 on an 18-month CD. The new rate is to be determined upon maturity, but if it were today, that same 18-month CD, instead of 2.75, would be getting an earned interest rate of 0.35. Many of you heard what Chairman Powell had to say yesterday, which has really put the markets in a volatile state today, that interest rates are likely to stay at or near 0 all the way till 2022. So you might as well say, interest is kind of like dust, not much of it. However, for all of us, grocery prices haven't gone down. And if our bank accounts and CDs are not even beating inflation, what are we going to do? Well, of course, bonds have a tendency to have an inverse relationship to interest rate. So as interest rates rise, bond prices go down. Subsequently, the same is true. As interest rates fall, bond prices go up. Many of our clients are looking for income. So what do we need to do at this point? Well, what we need to do is to look at alternatives, determine what else is out there that you can get a better rate of return on. How can we further diversify your portfolio? So let's address the third risk, sequence of returns. So exactly what is sequence of returns? Well, markets go up, markets go down. Returns can be positive or negative. But here's the question. Does the order of good and bad years matter? Well, let's take a look. In the money cycle, when we're accumulating, think of that when you're working and you're putting money into your 401k. Hopefully your employer is matching. You are saving in a non-qualified, possibly investment portfolio. This is when you're accumulating. But when we get to distribution, the second phase, this is the income phase. This is when you are retired and drawing an income from those savings you've accumulated over all the years. Well, let's take a specific example. Let's look at John and Mary, and they're in the accumulation phase. So here's Mary. She deposited $100,000. Her average return over 10 years, no withdrawals, was 6%. Well, in Mary's case, boy, look at those first 2 years, 30%, 20%. No wonder Mary's smiling. Awfully good returns in the middle, but then let's go down here to years 9 and 10, a -20 and a -30. So what do you think happened to Mary's balance at the end of 10 years? It was $154,764. Well, let's look at John. Same scenario, 100,000, no withdrawals, average return 6%. What's the difference? John had those two heavy negative years at the beginning of his 10-year period. And then again, nice returns in the middle and very strong returns at the end. Well, what do you think? Does John have more than Mary? Whoa, no, he has exactly the same as Mary. 154,764 for both of them. So sequence of return doesn't matter during the accumulation phase. But what about the distribution phase? We're going to call these folks Penny and Bob. Penny's looking pretty happy there. Bob, not so much. Well, let's try and figure out why. Same 100,000, same 6% average return, but now Penny's taking $6,000 per year in withdrawals. So remember those good years at the beginning and those bad years at the end? Well, what happened to Penny's $100,000? Well, she has more than what she put in. She's got $105,554. Not bad, with an average return of 6% and $6,000 withdrawals. Well, I wonder why Bob's not looking quite so happy as Penny. Same amount of money, same return, same withdrawals. But remember those negative or bad returns at the beginning? Well, let's kind of take a look at the good returns at the end and what happened to Bob. Well, he has 38,898, roughly a 2/3 drop in the size of his portfolio. So what do we know from this example? That in distribution, sequence of returns has a big impact, to the point where I know many of you after 2007 through 2009 had friends go back to work. They knew they couldn't make it. One of the major concerns we hear is fear of running out of money. Well, I'm sure in this case, Bob had a fear of running out of money. So what's the moral of the story? Losing money in the early years of retirement can hurt you. So what can we do? Well, we need to protect that retirement red zone. Back to football, we hope we get to see some this year. Those 10 years before retirement and 10 years after retirement are really a critical time. So when we see the accumulation portion of the money cycle, we believe that there's a middle section that most planners do not look at and account for, and that's the preservation. This is that red zone where we protect money you will need sooner rather than later from extreme shocks and declines. And we've developed a pretty simple strategy and approach that, again, most advisors don't use. They're just accumulate, distribute. So let's take a look. Weathering the storm with the bucket plan. What we hope will create is peace of mind. Now the bucket plan is now, soon, and later. Now is that safe and liquid, soon conservative and income, later long-term growth and legacy planning. Let's take each one. So in that safe and liquid, we're talking about what's that comfort amount in the bank or the savings account that could accommodate for income from 0 to 12 months. Could provide for an emergency, such as the water heater going out or a car repair. Or maybe you have a planned expense, a wedding, and someday we hope a trip that we can go on again. These are the funds that we want in that now bucket. But what about the soon bucket? This is our preservation bucket. This is the money that we may need to access sooner rather than later. So it should be invested for growth, but conservative growth. By choosing conservative investments, the returns in bucket 2 are going to be higher than in bucket 1. So this little bit of growth offsets the rising cost of gas, groceries, and other living expense and gives you some protection, income withdrawals, and inflation. But what about that later bucket? The later bucket is designed for growth. We anticipate that roller coaster ride because we're not going to touch this money in any of those time frames that you saw on previous recoveries from the market downturns. But it also means in this later bucket, we need to account for things like long-term care, disability, healthcare costs. That's probably the biggest issue that we hear in retirement. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen from the medical side? But it also talks about legacy. Now, many people think legacy just means legacy for children, but actually the most important part is legacy for the surviving spouse, going from married to single tax brackets. The standard deduction is cut in half. What about Social Security? There'll only be one Social Security check, not two. And possibly pensions could either go away or be reduced. So when taxes go up, being in the single tax bracket, income often goes down. So this later bucket is planning for your spouse as well as your children. So most advisors we find have what we call a not quite plan. And what's the problem? They leave out bucket 2, the soon bucket. They divide the portfolio into cash and then long-term investments. They leave a massive part of the portfolio fully exposed to market and interest rate risk. We call this the not quite bucket. So what's the value of the bucket plan? It's really that middle bucket, that preservation, so that when we have bear markets, yes, many bull markets, but by having a preservation bucket, a soon bucket, it might be the protection you need so that you don't have panic when markets have the volatility we're seeing today. So simple but powerful, bucket planning, peanut butter, smooth and chunky. These are all part of our planning concepts at Prosperity Partners Wealth Management. So what are the things we need to consider to get ahead in a market crisis? Well, we hope we all have that now bucket for those emergencies. Many people have been furloughed, jobs have been lost, people may be looking for a new job, so that now bucket comes into play. But for all of us, we need to reevaluate our risk tolerance. That mid-March downturn of over 30%, wow, that's when you have to put on your seat belts. And can you come through that? Remember that missing 1, 5, or 15 of the best days in the market. This is also a time to talk to us if you're still working about making Roth contributions. If you have retired and you have IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, this is also a great time to talk about Roth conversions. Tax rates have never been so low and are due to sunset and go back up at the end of 2025. So let's take advantage of these low rates, because we're not even guaranteed it'll last till 2025 with the massive debt that we've accumulated just in a matter of months. We can also harvest tax losses. So you may say, well, gosh, some of my tech positions have really skyrocketed. Well, you also may have some what we'd call entertainment, some travel, some hotel. Some of these types of positions have had some fairly deep losses. Could we do a little bit of tax loss harvesting and rebalancing of your portfolio? So we also want to look at contributions and distributions. Remember that with the CARES Act, the 2020 required minimum distribution has been waived. Does it make sense to leave the money in your IRA? If you're forced to take RMDs, you get a pass this year. But there's pros and cons to that as well. Also thinking about contributions if you're still working. You know, what's happening in the workforce environment with matches, your ability to contribute, to save, and certainly, again, Roth has a big part of that. Rebalancing your portfolio. Looking at what things may have skyrocketed while other things have lagged, we want to make sure that you're well diversified and having your soon and later buckets filled with assets with a little bit different risk tolerance for those. Also, if you have a mortgage or other debts, this might be a really good time to see about doing some refinancing of those particular items. So here are 7 things that we can do right now, but you may say, well, what's the next step? Well, course, if you're a client, we hope that you're feeling, oh yeah, I remember what's in my smooth or my soon bucket. And I remember what's in my later bucket or chunky bucket. I'm comfortable. But again, there may be some reasons that we need to get together. And we'd say, let's have a virtual meeting. Our offices are open with all the necessary safety precautions and distancing, but we'd be glad to have a meeting. If you're not a client, if you're a friend of one of our folks, we'd love to learn about you. We'd love for you to learn about us. And we'd love to answer your questions. Because again, Prosperity Partners has been founded on the fact that you may retire once. We retire with our clients every single day. So for everyone that tuned in today, we thank you very, very much. You will get a survey of what you thought of the workshop, along with a Calendarly calendar, so that if you would like to schedule an appointment, we would love to have the opportunity to meet with you. So remember those two parts that we discussed. Stay safe, stay at home if you can, and let's make sure your plan is working hard for you. Thank you for tuning in. And I would like to remind you, if you have any friends or loved ones that missed this particular seminar, we're going to repeat it next Tuesday, June 16th at noon. Another Lunch and Learn in the comfort of your home. Again, make it a great day from all of us at Prosperity Partners.